And now an academic look at where blockchain fits into economic theory. Hey there, I'm Zach Seward, managing editor of CoinDesk, and I am joined right now by a pair of distinguished guests. We have Chris Burniske, crypto investor, author, and co-founder of Placeholder Ventures, and the main event of today's show, Carlota Perez, a highly influential economist and the author of 2002's Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital. Hey, Chris and Carlota, thanks for being with us. How's it going?
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Good to see you both. So as you all just heard in Carlota's full 30-minute keynote umbrella, she's recently tested how blockchain fits into her research framework on economic disruption. I'm going to let Chris and Carlota do most of the talking here in this presentation, but first, let's revisit a key definition from Carlota's presentation.
Revolutionary technology. It's a radical break with past practices which can transform one or many industries and products and lead to one or several new technology systems up and downstream. So it's a pretty important thing, a revolutionary technology. So let's take a look at one of them, plastics, for instance, which was, of course, in the 20th century. So it's a revolutionary technology which has many systems. Look at that, successive technologies downstream, the whole range of consumer durables, radio, TV, kitchen appliances, toys, games, textile fibers, furniture, packaging, bottling, what wasn't changed by plastics? And then industrial supplies, of course, aerospace, automobile industry, yachts, boats, construction materials, anything you imagine. Every single industry was changed by plastics.
Okay, so plastics, the guy from The Graduate was right, turned out to be a revolutionary technology. On the other hand, however, you have another key definition. This is the technological revolution. Let's revisit this definition before we get going here. So a technological revolution is an evolving set of revolutionary technologies and their interrelated systems. All right, so Carlota, as we saw in your presentation, you say blockchain is a revolutionary technology, but not a technological revolution. That may disappoint some of our viewers. Sorry, viewers, but that's where we want to start the conversation today. So Carlota, since these are such big topics, would you mind kind of paraphrasing why you think blockchains are only a revolutionary technology?
Well, you know, it's interesting to say only a revolutionary technology because that's quite something. I mean, blockchain would be in the company of plastics, as I just explained, or electricity. Electricity, for instance, do you think that's big enough? But it's not a technological revolution. Computers, that's another revolutionary technology, but it's not a technological revolution because a technological revolution is a much bigger thing. It's a combination of several revolutionary technologies, all the systems that they provide, and it also has a particular structure. It generally has a whole infrastructure, but also a key factor that makes the relative cost structure go in favor of that thing, like now information or oil before, or coal in the past, or steel in the mid-century. So it changes the relative cost structure, so it guides innovation in all areas. That's the other thing. A technological revolution transforms all areas, and it also, I mean, that means food, that means housing, that means mobility. So for a technology to be at the core of a technological revolution, it has to be very important. But for the revolution to be a revolution, it's got to transform everything. And obviously, I don't think you're going to claim that blockchain is itself a full revolution.
So that's actually, if you'd humor us, Carlota, what I want to see if we can make a case for, that blockchains may be a key software fabric for an emerging technological revolution that will supersede our current information and communications technologies revolution. I guess being a millennial, I'm never satisfied even if something is just a revolutionary technology. So as a little bit of background for our viewers who haven't read your book, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, these technological revolutions happen roughly every 50 years, and we're about 50 years into the current ICT revolution, with packet switching coming about in 1960, and I believe you defined the beginning of this revolution as the microprocessor in around 1970. Sadly, we haven't had a widely spread golden age with these technologies. the way we did with oil or automobiles or mass production. And so where I'd like to begin here is it possible that we have a new technological revolution that supersedes our current ICT revolution before this revolution has fully matured and concluded with the golden age?
That's a very smart way of turning it. Yes, it is possible, Chris. It is possible that this revolutionary technology could be part of a future technological revolution. The question is this information revolution, which did begin in 1971, is this one over, or does it still have to have its deployment period, which is the period of the golden age? Do we still have it ahead? And I hold we do. It's still ahead and it's still possible. Of course, what you're saying is perfectly possible. Supposing, say, take computers. Computers appeared precisely at an equivalent point as now, during the Second World War, which is now COVID-19 might become the equivalent of the Second World War to bring about the golden age. So the golden age of the post-war came after computers were invented. Computers became very important throughout the mass production revolution, which is not about information. It was about plastics, it was about materials, it was about electricity, it was about automobiles especially. So all that revolution could also do with a bit of help from computers. So computers developed, and so did control instruments, and so did transistors, and so on. And by the time that revolution was mature and needed replacement, they could all come together, and then they brought the information revolution. Now, the problem with the information revolution is that the internet, which is the infrastructure which every revolution has, we had canals, then we had railroads, and then we had the transcontinental railways plus steamships and so on, and then we had the roads and electricity and airplanes. So we had a huge infrastructure for the fourth, and the infrastructure for this revolution took a long time to come along, because internet, which was, by the way, invented by the government, not by the private sector, was given to the private sector in '94. So it's only been around for 24 years. So it's almost as if the revolution somehow had two bits to still come together. And every revolution is different. Some are longer, some are shorter. So it's not a question of duration. I could give you a lot of arguments why I think this one in particular, among other things, because it's a globalization, which the previous globalization was also the longest one. So what we have is a situation where it is very possible, and I think artificial intelligence also claims something similar to blockchain, the idea of being a revolution. The whole of the Davos crowd calls it the fourth revolution. They count it differently because they don't count by first. But anyway, lots of people are claiming, because we know we're living revolutionary times. So it depends how you see it. But I would definitely say that what you say is possible. But the important thing is to understand the truth in a way. I mean, this whole idea, to have an illusion of writing the future is a very important thing to move people. But then if you understand that the future is socio-political rather than just technological, then you understand that you need much more than something like blockchain in order to bring a golden age which benefits the whole of society.
So I understand history is messy, and certainly these cycles won't be cookie cutter 50-year periods, and that everyone wants to be at the center of a revolution. But pulling on this thread a little more, in your presentation, you mentioned how new technological revolutions come about when the prior revolution is reaching its limits. And when I look around the world at some of the antitrust cases popping up against big tech, or what I would consider mostly incompetent governments, both seem to be reaching their limits. Do you think that these structures of tech and government are fixable within our current paradigm, or do we need a bigger shakeup?
We certainly need a very big shakeup, because it's been too many years of this incredibly harmful religion of the pure market and government is the problem, which has created all the things that COVID-19 has revealed now. I mean, all the things, all the poverty, and not only COVID-19, populism is a very typical thing. You know, Hitler was elected. He didn't take power over. He was elected by the majority.
Wow.
Because people are hurt by technological revolutions in the few periods. And what happens at this particular period we're living in is precisely that people are disappointed with government, people are disappointed with business, they're angry with business because they have lost their jobs, because all sorts of, you know, they have lost their dream, what they had before, because people dream of things that are possible. And suddenly, if the situation changes so much that they lose the possibility of living better, that their children will be better off, all those things that have to do with your dreams, if they're destroyed, then you follow somebody who will offer heaven. So what happens at this time is what? First of all, giants, companies that are completely very, very strong and that have to be somehow regulated in order to make sure that they don't harm society. This is exactly what happened in the third surge. At the end of the 19th century, we had all the big monopolies, all the big trusts. And what happened then in the golden age when Teddy Roosevelt came in, this is not the this is not FDR, I'm talking about Theodore Roosevelt in 1900. He comes in, and what does he do? Trust buster. That's what he did. Plus progressive era, because he also reduced corruption. Corruption was so bad. That's what Mark Twain called the Gilded Age, meaning it wasn't golden. Right. It looked gold, but it wasn't really. So it's precisely that, thinking that government is no good, that government is corrupt, and you have to change it. There was also sanitation. The meat packing industry was horrendously, you know, really terrible. The milk industry, they used to put paint to make it white. I mean, the horrible things. So then you had to bring all the bad things that business was doing to fix it, plus improve the health of the workers and the conditions of the workers, and so on. So that's what was called the progressive era, just like the second, like the post-World War golden age, sort of the New Deal. The New Deal, which Roosevelt tried, the other Roosevelt tried to fix in the 1930s and couldn't, and the Supreme Court was bringing down every law that he brought to help people. But after the war, everybody understood, and then they did it. So now after COVID, I hope that we're going to understand that we've got to get a better society going, and that we will have a golden age of the information revolution. And within the golden age of the information revolution, I'm sure we're going to have fantastic things done by blockchain and by artificial intelligence too. Yeah.
So it sounds then like you're arguing, okay, we've been in the installation period of the ICT revolution, and we're hitting crisis now. And after crisis comes more activity, say, from the state to roll out deployment and this true golden age. Now, what I was hearing you say a little bit earlier with how computers were coming about during World War II and during the prior technological revolution is a little bit of, we can think of that as the seeding of the new default. And so I want to talk a little bit about the new default of what blockchains could be. So at their core, blockchains are open data layers that allow all participants to access and coordinate around the same data. And every blockchain system relies on a global community to store and sync the information that makes up the system. You know this already. Now, almost nowhere in the existing paradigm, we've been working, placeholder as a whole. So almost when I look at the existing paradigm, whether it be, say, you know, Facebook versus what its users see, or citizens versus what the nation state sees, there's not equal and flat access to information. Whereas in a crypto network, everyone has equal and flat access to information and then agrees on coordination from there. And so I think of this in a way as the seeding of a new default. And so this re-architecting of access to information, my question to you is, is this not enough to make the claim that this could be the new default of the next technological revolution? Because it feels so fundamental to our socio-political systems.
That sounds so nice, but I have a problem with it. I do agree it's a great new governance thing, but have you ever tried to organize a community? Have you ever tried to organize any sort of group? Do you know what it's like to organize a group without a leader, where everybody is the same? I was a boss once. I try not to be a boss. I hate being a boss, but I was in my country. I was the head of a technology directorship in a ministry. And I said I would accept the job as long as I could have everybody participate equally and so on. Well, I almost resigned. When trying to do this, I realized that without being a leader, I could not get anything done. So I don't know if you believe that without a leader, you can have a good organization. It sounds very nice, but I'm sure you've got to solve it somehow, that this idea of having a sort of anarchic, stateless, nobody leads, everybody's the same. If you believe that, maybe it can happen in some cases. I have never seen it happen properly. And the hippie communities that tried to do things like that ended up in chaos. So I'm not so sure. I really think that stateless utopias, libertarian utopias are as flawed as communist utopias. Too much state or too little state, they're both really bad. So I think maybe we have to see a place. I'm sure there is a very important place for blockchain, but I'm not sure it's in order to eliminate the state and become like, somehow one thing that worries me about the libertarian ideology is that it's only for the strong, it's only for the knowledgeable, it's only for the powerful. You can't really have a society where the individual is completely free and there's nobody trying to make sure that there is no unfairness without harming many, many of the weak. And the weak are not weak because they are bad or they're incompetent or they don't try hard enough. It's just that the lottery of life has given them poverty, has given them the wrong color, the wrong race, the wrong whatever. You have a lot of things that don't have to do with that. And you have to have somehow an authority, a leadership that's accepted in a democratic space where society is for all,
I agree with that. Placeholder does get very involved with the different crypto networks it supports. And some of these forms of governance are very messy. And it's when I think about a blockchain as a system that custodies and transfers valuable assets, I like to use that kind of philosophical abstraction and say, okay, we can use this for really good voting systems, right? We layer in privacy and potentially we could have much better voting systems which are directly representing the constituents and, maybe more granular breakdowns, such that you can have the specific community that is affected directly voting on things. And, there's a whole world to explore there that we're very early in. I want to actually talk a little bit more about the state because I know it's a key part of your current focus and initiative. So you said in your presentation that only the state can unleash a golden age by redesigning taxation, regulation, policies, and institutions to tilt the playing field in synergistic directions. And as we've been talking about a little bit here, actually one of your former researchers, Mario Lal, who now works at Placeholder, and thank you very much for that.
He's fantastic. I hate you for that.
He wrote a piece, which I recommend everyone read, called Blockchains Are Bureaucracies par excellence. And he points out that blockchains are automating administrative infrastructure. And as I spoke about a little bit, the ability to transfer and tally votes, and therefore, in a way, able to encode the state. So I'd like to ask you, do you see the possibility of blockchains encoding, extending, or otherwise modernizing the state?
I agree with Mario. I definitely think that it could have a fantastic role. There are things, well, democracy you mentioned already, the civil service in general could be helped by these systems. The social safety net, I can think of universal basic income being based on a form of blockchain where everybody would be a participant, and therefore, you know, it sort of almost gives legitimacy to that thing. And then you have identity also that could be associated with that. Of course, taxes, it would be wonderful to have something that could stop people from taking their money to the Bahamas, and yet using all the infrastructure, all the education, everything that society gives to a company that makes it easy to make money, to be successful, has to be funded, has to be paid. The roads they drive their cars on, but they take their money out of the country and don't pay taxes. So somehow to have a fair tax system, if the tax system were designed in a fair way and nobody evaded it, we'd have a much better society. So that's another thing that perhaps, I don't know, I hope, health property records, it would be fantastic also to have city planning and property records organized in a sort of blockchain system. I don't know, the
Right.
logistics, many things. So
Right.
definitely I think so. Not only that, I would say those challenges are much bigger, but much bigger than many of the business challenges that people are now facing. I mean, I would really encourage people to start thinking, can they help make an agile state? Can they help make a safe, non-corrupt system for all those things that the state has to do? We actually need young people interested in helping modernize the state, because you know what happens? The state today is exactly the way that General Motors and IBM and all these companies used to be in the past. While, you know, that's the whole problem, that the state always copies the organization of companies, the paradigm, the way of organizing that's best, copies it later. And that's why golden ages also come later, when the state actually comes in as an agile. Well, in this case, it would be agile. That other time it would have been divisional and everything, even though a very innovative state, because don't forget that it's the state that got computers done. It's the state that got the internet going. It's the state that got microprocessors going. The whole revolution was done by government and then handed over to the private sector. So don't have the illusion that it's the private sector that innovates and government is just a heavy thing. No, today the government is truly a legacy government, the organization of government. We need to modernize it. And you have one of the tools. Artificial intelligence is another tool. There are other things within information technology. It's not just putting computers in. It's also changing the human organization, making it more innovative, making more agile. All those things that consultants tell companies, they have to be able to work with government and make it attractive for young people. The challenges for young people that are really tech savvy, they can even think, how can we regulate Facebook and all these guys? My old ideas are, well, break it up, of course. Take out, I mean, why did Instagram, why WhatsApp, why do they belong to Facebook? They should be the competitors. They should be fighting. They're not competing. They are actually all swallowed up inside Facebook. So I think, yeah, break it up. That's my simple idea from my old, dinosaur times. Is there any better way to do it? To protect people's privacy, to take away so much power? It's so dangerous. It's worse than a state, So somehow new thinking in terms of helping society. Making money, just making money, it's sort of boring. If you can both make money and improve society, it's much more exciting.
Yeah, I think, and we've talked about this in the past a handful of times around the bad rap, say, that the state gets within the crypto space. And some of this is because of the adversarial nature of really disruptive innovation. And, there's been a fair amount of bad behavior in the crypto space. But if we zoom out the state has taken on many forms throughout human history, and it's really kind of this connective fabric that fills the gaps between what these smaller modes of organization do. And I recently reread The Sovereign Individual, and another great book, maybe not as good as yours, but pretty close. And in that, they make the argument that the economics of violence and then the economics of protection against that violence are key macro drivers of how we organize. And as we emerged from the Middle Ages into the industrial era, we had to centralize society to draw from larger bodies of humans to fund the growing costs of aggression and protection. And so when we look at cryptography really collapses the cost of protection of one's digital assets. And so you could make the argument that a nation state will be less necessary to at least protect against that form of confiscation. And so, from there, as we were speaking about earlier, you can see blockchains as kind of these global accounting systems, and there are, and this is where we get pretty amorphous. But the question I want to ask you is, do you think the nation state is definitely here to stay, or is it one form of organization that has served us for hundreds of years that could eventually be outmoded?
Now, that's a problem, because, to be against government or to be against the nation state.
That's true. I don't want to put you in hot water.
I'll tell you what. I actually think that what we need now is a multi-level government. We need to go down to the community, down to the cities, and give much more power to local government, because we have this possibility of having interconnected things so that people can adapt the same sort of general things, but adapt them to the specific conditions of their area, to make sure that there is wealth creation, that there is fairness, that is, that people are making money while making life better for each, that there is housing, that there is infra, all those things, instead of having them way far there in the nation state, should be down, down, down. And then you come up all the way up to global governance. There is no way that you can have financial global flows and then try to regulate them from national governments, because they're much more powerful and they're completely global, as you will know. I mean, it's ridiculous.
That's crypto.
Right? And what happens whenever a government tries to regulate in favor of society and against unfairness and bad behavior by the banks, they punish the government and they go somewhere else. They have the power to just exit. So what do we need? We need everything regulated at the point at which it should be both regulated and protected, and all the other things that have to be done, even taxation.
Carlota, I'm going to jump in there. This is a fantastic conversation, first of all. We're about to switch over to the AMA section of this event. I've been jotting down notes. I'm really excited to ask you guys some more questions. We're going to leave this portion of the discussion here for now, put a placeholder on it, as it were, and we're going to jump over to the AMA shortly. So thanks for joining us. Chris, a fun fact, you're joining us from Hawaii, so it must be ridiculously early. How are you doing right now? What time is it right there?
It's 5:45, so it's an hour and a half later than I woke up, so at least it's not as early as it was then.
Oh my God. Well, thank you so much for doing that. Carlota, you're from London, so mercifully it's a little bit later in the day, but thanks. That was great.
It's a very nice time. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. So we got a lot of good stuff to get to, a lot of engaged people in the chat already who are eager to get this going. So I guess I want to just throw like kind of a personal question at you guys. Chris, you mentioned your day-to-day world when it comes to placeholder ventures.
I probably use Carlota's theories every day in helping frame what's going on in the current technology landscape, and also how it relates to how crypto will progress. It's no secret that Fred Wilson is a big fan of Carlota's book, Technological Revolutions in Financial Capital, and I believe he's interviewed Carlota prior. And I became very close friends with Joel Monegro when he was at USV, And Joel and I actually ended up starting Placeholder. So I believe it was Joel who told me about Carlota's book. And then I started tweeting Carlota's book. I used to tweet a lot about books as I'd read them, and I kept tagging Carlota. And I think some of it was frustrating because some of it was misunderstood, or it spawned conversations of misunderstanding. And then that caused Carlota and I was already following Carlota, but it started us, we opened up a dialogue, and then that all culminated in a conversation where I believe she told Mario, hey, these two VCs from New York are gonna explain blockchain to me. Do you wanna join? And so we had a hangout, and long story short, Mario joined that call, didn't say a word the whole call. And then Joel and I were just really curious. We were like, Mario sat there and listened to the whole thing and said almost nothing. We got to talk to that guy. And then we started talking with him, and I think he was phasing out of some of his work with Carlota. And long story short, he joined Placeholder, but you know, it's all part of, say, the Carlota family now.
Well, that's good. The extended Carlota family.
I got a very good course on blockchain from them. I was terribly dumb. I couldn't figure out what it meant, this mining and all this. It was really terrible. Now I think I understand a little bit, both that and
we're
blockchain.
Still working.
And I just, it's still working. I just learned, I finally understood that Ethereum was a platform for many, many, many things, and not just for one, not just for money, which is great. And of course, I think also logistics is a very important thing, and they're big on that. So yeah, I'm learning. I'm slowly learning.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in this space.
My whole strength is the social science view of technology. So I look at technology from far. I don't look at technology from inside, and that makes a big difference in understanding many things that a lot of technology people don't need to understand, but they would do better with it.
Got it. So just going to the AMA question, there's a lot of people in here right now who are eager to get their questions to you. So I'll start with one for Carlota, and you know, based on, again, caveat everything based on your understanding of blockchain at this point in time. So Carlota, would you consider blockchain as a 1, general purpose technology, 2, a technology to reduce transaction costs, or 3, an institutional technology? Where do you, where do you
more on the institutional side, as far as I understand now. I don't know how general purpose it is, because if you compare with railways, or, I mean, purpose, of course, it can move any information and any money, things that are intangible. So other general purpose technologies like electricity, or like, you know, they can do all sorts of things, but all they can do is move electrons. So somehow the notion of general purpose has to do with how many applications you can actually have. And I think there is a bit of limit, but definitely an organizational model. I strongly think that it is an original and very important one. And we just have to see how well it can perform.
Gotcha. Chris, I want to turn to you, synthesizing a few questions in the chat. How do central bank digital currencies sort of complicate the picture here? How are blockchain technologies being incorporated by central banks in a way that could complicate some of these models going forward?
So on the whole, I think central bank digital currencies are great for crypto. In a way, they normalize it, or they provide a halo effect of legitimacy that allows everyone else to say, okay, if central banks are using this technology, then this technology is here to stay. It's not a fad, so on and so forth. Now, the devil's in the details as to how different central banks implement this, right? So in an authoritarian regime like China, it actually scares me a lot because that perfect transparency for the state using a permission chain, it doesn't open up the access to information like Carlota and I were talking about earlier. It actually puts all the control and all the information perfectly in the state's hands. And that can lead to, you know, all kinds of capital controls, citizen controls. So I think, you know, we're going to see some great implementations of central bank digital currencies and some pretty dystopian ones.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question to think of, right? Here's a disruptive technology that in some ways is being co-opted to potentially further the surveillance capabilities of certain state actors. The end of your conversation I thought was really fascinating. Carlota, I want to go back to you on this question of, are nation states a thing of the past? and give you a chance to elaborate a little bit more. That was kind of a spicy question from Chris. So you kind of see, what's the longer answer to that question? Are nation states done? Can we replace them? Is there a new structure that will replace the nation state going forward?
No, I don't think so. No, but I think nation states have to change the way they act, the role they play. I see them more as brokers between the local and the supranational. I think we need a supranational authorities to deal with supranational things, which at least the environment, and I mean, as it gets worse and worse, the environment is going to become much more supranational, and we have to agree on something. And finance, I think, is another thing that's already supranational. So to have some form of regulation at the world level, plus a lot of devolution way down to the smallest unit, and then the sort of national state as a broker, as an organizer, as more of a not an actor, but almost like a protector of the bottom in this world that's much more complicated. So I do think that we still need, and in fact, the notion of globalization, I see it very much more as an economic thing. Companies globalize, the economy globalizes, but people are still in a territory and they are still needing some form of protection to regulate what happens with their lives. I think COVID-19 has been such a revelation. We've seen all sorts of things come up of what was really happening in society.
I think this one dovetails nicely with that, actually, about the role of government. It's getting a few upvotes from our audience that's participating in the chat. The question is to you, Carlota. Can we follow up on your point on breaking up tech giants that hold large amounts of consumer data? And do you think that this will help realize the next golden age? That's necessarily sort of a government role, right? If we're talking about antitrust protections. Can you follow up a little bit more on this idea of breaking up tech giants such as Facebook?
Okay, first of all, of course, say the case of Facebook, which is a US thing, maybe only the US has the power to do that, but Facebook is a global company. It's not, I mean, it's an American-based company, but it affects everybody all over the globe. So what do you do? To break it up, I think is important because of competition, because if WhatsApp and Instagram were both alive and growing rather than now under the umbrella and sort of inside, I think it would be better for competition, and therefore they would think of things that would differentiate them and that would improve the service and improve certain. But the problem is not just that. That's why I was saying that I would rather see young people think of a technological solution, to understand what do we do about the question of privacy. Because the real problem is they now have a power, everybody's talking about the state shouldn't have this thing, we better, blockchain would stop the state from controlling. And if they were going to control, how about Facebook or any of the others? I mean, I'm picking on Facebook just because it's the most obvious one. But they have enormous control, and we saw what happened in England with the elections and the Brexit thing, and how they actually used people's data in order to control democratic behavior. We're in a very difficult, we're almost in a Big Brother, but Big Brother not the state, but Big Brother the companies. So what are we going to do about that? And we need to think in a technological way, because I'm sure it's only technologically we'll be able to do it. I even think that this GDPR, every time you get this thing, you say, accept, accept, accept. You can't spend your life reading instructions and deciding, yes, I want this and that. It must be better than that. It must be done in a different way. We must be able to change the issue of, data has now become a raw material. It is a source of wealth, and we're all giving it up because it's being taken from us. And even though I don't, I'm not really this thing of privacy. I think, for instance, that everybody should have an ID card. We should have some identity form, whether it's on a platform or on a piece of some plastic with some chip or something. Everybody should be identified. I think it's ridiculous to defend privacy in that way, but to defend your data, the information about your personality, your preferences, your political leanings, all these things, with all these dictators and populists coming up. I mean, what Putin is doing just now, he's even taking over the last newspaper that was more or less not totally controlled. You know, it's really bad. We have too much autocracy in the world, too much of that. And that's not the fault of the government. It's fault of the people who have gone against the government and created the austerity, that created the anger, that created the acceptance of the autocrats.
Zach, I want to just underscore a point here, because Carlota and I have spent a lot of time talking about this over the last few years. And I think the key for understanding where Carlota is coming from here is there's a big difference between the idea of governance or government versus the implementation. And none of us like the implementation, right? Carlota doesn't like the implementation of most of what we see, or a lot of the, certainly the autocracies. And so it's not to give up on the idea as a whole, but actually to modernize and improve the implementation.
So this is a great follow-up question from someone who has identified himself as Jonas. Thank you, Jonas. The question is, and I'm curious to see if you're going to have a diverging opinions on this. Simple question: are you optimistic about technocratic solutions to supranational problems? Are you optimistic or are you pessimistic when it comes to how tech is going to be able to solve these things?
Do you want me to start, Carlota? Or you want to start? Okay. Well, I would say it depends on the supranational problem. So actually, Placeholder is starting to work with a team called Nori, which is using a technological solution to create a reference rate for carbon sequestration. And I actually think that this requires a technological solution in order to prove out carbon sequestration, in order to create a legitimate market around these carbon-backed assets, and then allow price discovery around those assets to really drive innovation to pull more carbon out of the ground. And so, you know, you have technology. This is just one example. And again, it depends on the problem, but you have technology as the base upon which then you layer these socio-political institutions that leverage that technology to solve the problem.
Carlota, I want to turn to you with that question.
I think another very important supranational problem is tax avoidance and all these shenanigans that they do with taxes in order not to pay. I think that a combination of political and technological solutions would be needed. And if we don't have a good technology to do it, no matter how much political decisions are taken, you just, you know, they'll just find another way, because it's not a question of laws only. It's a question of how do you do it. There is another problem talking about the environmental things. You know, everybody talks about energy, renewable energy, and all these things. But when we think of everything that's really creating the problem, we need to think of materials, including plastics, of course, but then aluminum and steel and everything. They're all energy, really. Everything we do, paper, full, you know, lots and lots of energy on that. And then we have transport, which is another huge thing, and global transport. Well, I was thinking that one of the ways we could do, you know, we could help people innovate in the direction of reducing many of those things is by putting a tax not on, now we have a tax on labor, we have a tax on the VAT in Europe, which is a value-added tax, which is also, it's a tax on labor and profits, but we could have a tax instead on materials, energy, and transport. If we were to tax those three things, then we would just flip the taxes, just get them from that instead of the other. Innovation would go in the direction of reducing distance. So we might produce our food around the cities instead of bringing it from abroad. We might eat it fresh rather than can it or tin it or freeze it or whatever. I mean, there are so many things, materials, we would change materials for biomaterials, and some things that are now produced in Asia would be produced locally because transport would pay taxes. So say we were to do that. We cannot do it without a fantastic technological solution. That couldn't be done just by declaring it, so you have a law that does that. There is no way. It's very, very difficult. One of the reasons why in Europe they use value-added tax is because it's very easy. It has a system that makes it very easy to collect. So many things that states would like to do for the benefit of society and for growth and wealth and, for all the well-being things, including to defend democracy, require technological solutions. And we now have the information technology, which is the one that's more adapted to this sort of problem. So I think we have huge challenges ahead. And it'd be great to do both the political and the technological.
Gotcha. So we have a lot of great questions in this chat. Round of applause to everyone for tuning in. We're supposed to wrap up at 12, but I want to go a little bit longer if you'll stick with us for the next 5 or 10 minutes even. I want to get as many of these questions to our guests as possible. Quick one, maybe not even necessarily blockchain related. This is from Ader in Brazil. Carlota, what's your view on the future of retirement plans and pension funds?
Oh, that's a huge problem because society was counting on everything going smoothly and the money flowing each time so that every generation would actually put their money in, but it would be funded by the work of the next generation. So it was all, but now those funds are shrinking and there are serious problems with that. So we also, first of all, we need to increase productivity, increase wealth, increase employment to, make societies actually come back. And that's what a golden age is about. And the thing is that most people think, there are some people that are horrified of robotics and artificial intelligence and all that. That is very primitive. We need those technologies to increase productivity as much as we can. But since that means unemployment, then we need to create other sources of employment. And one of the things that creates sources of employment is a change in lifestyles. So we need to go to smart green lifestyles. Green means that we're going to innovate in materials, innovate in the way, and innovate in things like I was just saying, like having food production around the cities, having changing architecture, transforming our suburbans. Suburbia is dead. We cannot have people traveling an hour and a half every day in the morning and in the afternoon. That's finished. So we've got to turn every suburb into something. So it might be an innovation hub. It might be a health center. It might be, we have to think of things that would make work be there and people to mobilize from other things. We have enormous changes to make in terms of how to face the future with high productivity, as high as possible in everything that can be made more productive with information technology, and then everything that can be environmentally friendly, which means breaking away with the old model of mass production, which means stop the planned obsolescence thing. We need objects, all the electrical appliances should last 100 years, and they can. Refrigerator doesn't even last 5, and that's not by chance. That's because at some point when the mass production revolution was mature and it couldn't produce any more profits, they couldn't have more markets. They invented a way of making every person buy the same thing several times because they already had, the market was saturated. And that was an intelligent thing to do, but it's over. We have all these people from the developing world, from China, from India, there are plenty of new consumers. So 100 years, maintenance, chips on every product, 3D printing of spare parts, no more production of spare parts. You 3D print all spare parts, you do maintenance, you do, I could continue on for an hour about all the things we could do to create new jobs as long as we start moving from products to services using the power of ICT and from excess use of materials and energy to conservation, reduction, more lives, more creativity, more exercise, more you know, all these other things that we now have thanks to information technology.
Zach, this ties really well with the prior question, and I'll be quick here. With all technologies, when you're designing them, you start with an intention, right? And I think one of the problems with the private sector is if the intention is to extract profits, then you get the planned obsolescence, kind of like Carlota was saying, because that does drive profits. Whereas in the public sector, if you start with the intention of helping the collective, then that drives the design of the technology, right? And so the technology is always going to be used in the implementation to solve these problems, but you have to make sure that you have the right intention in the design of the technology.
Got it. I want to go, well, first of all, I imagine a lot of users of Apple products nodding vigorously at this discussion of planned obsolescence. So it's good to hear it. Chris, I want to stay with you on this one. It's our top question at the moment. It's from Yana. We're going to talk about hyperinflation and the role that stablecoins may
Rihanna's on the chat. Woohoo!
Not Rihanna. Sorry, not the Rihanna, unfortunately. Yana Petkanik, if I pronounced that right. We'll see how that went. Yeah, so her question is about stablecoins in countries that suffer from inflation or hyperinflation. The potential concern, and we saw it a ton over talks of Libra over the last year, is local governments losing control over their monetary supplies. Chris, how do you see the future of states playing out where in this future where stablecoins reach a mass level of adoption? What's your thought on that?
Sure. Well, Carlota will have more thoughts on the macro landscape, but as it pertains to crypto and what's going on with stablecoins right now, people who've been paying attention have seen that stablecoins have been rocketing in originations. So we've had billions and billions of dollars of stablecoins originated. And in a way, these stablecoins, most of which are USD denominated, are the most accessible form of USD for most people in the world, right? There's no permissions on them. There's no capital controls. And so you could say they're freer than a dollar that you would find in the existing system. Now, I think as you look on a macro landscape, you know, the dollar is strengthening. That's causing a lot of problems for emerging economies. And we saw a similar thing in 08, 09. Now, typically, the short-term impact is the opposite, or the short-term reaction is the opposite of the long-term impact. And so while the dollar may be strengthening here, you know, depending on what the Fed does, if we're too irresponsible with our money supply, we could lose our reserve asset status. But I would defer to Carlota and, you know, knowing more of the specifics of how all these levers could work out.
No, I really I'm completely puzzled about the notion of stable coins. I still need another course, Chris, for me to know exactly what you mean, because
we'll
as far as I know, every single coin has to be subject to the faith or not faith, or trust or not trust. I mean, coins are about trust. So I cannot see that because it's on a blockchain or because somebody or has a nice name or something, I don't know why it would be stable, but I am ignorant and I go up. But basically, I think all coins naturally, because they have to do with people trusting them or not, they've got to fluctuate. So
Carlota,
you will tell me, but
wait.
I will ask you for a lesson one of these days so that I can understand.
Do that later.
Your mind is going to be blown when Chris tells you about DAI and the MakerDAO CDP platform. It's a fantastic example.
We talked about Maker a little, yeah. But future.
So yeah, Carlota, we're going to go back to a more general macro question. We'll probably end it on this one. This is a question from the audience. Audience, thanks so much. You guys have done a great job getting these questions out here. So yeah, this may take us to our end at 12:10 Eastern time. But Carlota, this one's for you. What's your view on the massive printing and injection of money by governments currently in response to the COVID-19 crisis?
Oh, I think it's great. I think that does two things. One is to show that government are the problem unless there is a real problem, and then government becomes the solution. So the first thing we need to know is that if we didn't have a government, we'd be in real trouble. So this whole libertarian thing, you know, what do you do in a libertarian society if you don't have a government that's willing to print money like mad? And thank God they're doing that. Do you know how many million people in the UK, which only has 60 million inhabitants, how many million people are in unstable 0 hours gig economy, whatever contracts, which means that as soon as they were locked in, they have no income at all. You can't have a society that doesn't have that. That's why I've been onto basic income from the very beginning. I think basic income is the least we can do in a developed society. I would like it to also happen in the developing countries. I think it's more difficult. And I think the main reason why you can have basic income as a something, it doesn't matter if you print it the first time, you're going to get it back on taxes in developed countries. But in developing countries, the tax system is lousy, so you don't know, so you cannot do universal basic income. I don't think you can try. But I think these countries obviously need that. But then the state is going to come in. I mean, this whole thing of paying 80% of people's salaries that are out, or facing the unemployment insurance claims of millions of people, all these things governments do. But I wish it were a more agile government. I wish people had more protection. They had the cushion of a basic income plus other things. And I really believe that printing is fantastic. Debt, you know, at the end of the World War, I believe in the US, the debt was something like 140% of GDP. And thanks to inflation, which was a typical feature of actual improving incomes throughout the whole of the 50s and 60s, it brought it down to about 70% of, you know, inflation plus all that was paid back. So there are many ways of coming back, but there is no way that we should go back to austerity when we come back. We've got to keep that debt as something that society needed, and then figure out a way of getting out of it without punishing people with austerity again. Austerity has brought us all the evils of populism, the evils of people being completely destroyed. People are desperate. You can't do that now. Go back. Now I gave you a little bit of money, and now when you come back, you're going to die again. So I really think it's a responsibility of society, and it's a responsibility of government to protect the great majority. It should be everybody. To provide health. I find it incredible. I still don't understand how the US could have a system where health is private. It's amazing. Health is basic. You've got to have healthy citizens. How could you have people not going in for COVID-19 or having to pay $100 for diabetes medicine? It's impossible. A country as powerful as the US to have no universal health system. Every single European country has it, even, you know, the little ones like Portugal, Spain, you know, the ones that are less powerful, they all have it. Why can't the US have it? So there are many things of that sort. And of course, this austerity and the government is the problem and all that has made people believe that the government shouldn't do it. I agree that it has to be done in a very modern, agile, innovative, fantastic way, and not in an old, bureaucratic, boring, heavy, paper full, you know, all the horrible things of what we have inherited of a system that's already completely obsolete.
All right, Carlota, thank you so much. Just so much food for thought. I'm glad that you took the time to A, think about these big topics, and B, share it with us here on Consensus Distributed.
Thanks
Amazing
for
stuff.
the invitation. It's been really a pleasure.
It's been great to hear from you. And Chris, thank you so much for leading a strong conversation. And thank you for fielding these questions as well. So with that, virtually thank these great guests, and we will see you all next time. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Any questions, go to my webpage and make them. I'll answer.